everyone, it's Mrs. Goodwin. As I mentioned on my email to you all, our assembly this week is on the theme of equality. We'd always planned to cover LGBTQ issues because June is Pride Month. But with recent events in the news, we knew that Black Lives Matter was an important topic that we needed to cover now. I hope that you have all seen Mr. Sapong's moving video on our social media accounts. It's taken all of us a little while to think about what we wanted to say and how we wanted to say it. We, even as teachers, need to make sure that we listen, that we learn, that we have truly understood what it is that we need to say at this time, that our students need us to say at this time. And I hope that you take this assembly as just part of ongoing work that we will make sure happens. And please do not treat this in isolation. There is no way this assembly is going to cover everything we need to say, but I hope it's a start, and I will really appreciate your thoughts at the end of the assembly if you think there's anything else that you think needs covering in more detail. I imagine that this will spill over into several Thought for the Week's assemblies and certainly into our ongoing PSHE work. So here is the start of our assemblies on equality, but with a particular focus on Black Lives Matter. This is a really important topic to us, and it always has been. Our core values that underpin everything that we do as a school have so many phrases in them that suggest that we feel that it is so important that you are never disadvantaged and never discriminated against, and that we all take responsibility to make sure that happens. We ask for our students to be open-minded, respectful, that you consider how you can make positive contributions to your community. And sometimes that's through having those high expectations for your own behaviour and the way that you treat your peers, the way that you talk about your peers. But remember, this extends beyond school. This is about your life on social media. How do you treat your peers? How do you speak about your peers, your community on social media? So this has always underpinned our work as a school. But of course it goes well beyond what we do at King John. It's part of human rights. And I'd like to show you this poem from Tanya in Year 10, which she sent in response to my email. And you can pause this video at any time if you want to read something in more detail. So please do take the time just to quickly pause this video and read it in full. But look at the words that Tanya repeats. It needs to stop. That racism needs to stop. But why is it we're having to even say that? Why is it that we have had to have this reminder? As I say, it's part of human rights, and we are a rights respecting school. We make sure that our curriculum covers your rights and that we refer back to it. It's in every single Thought for the Week. But look how many are about you, your identity, and the fact that you have a right to be protected from discrimination. You have a right to have a view as well. That's why we reached out to you regarding this assembly and asked you what you felt needed to be said. But what we ask is that you do come to us and that we will help you at times put that across in a way that makes the biggest impact. So thank you to everybody that did take the time to send in ideas for me. I couldn't use everything in this assembly, but I have heard you, I have listened, and it's something that I hope that we can continue to work on together. So the question is really, if this is part of human rights, why is Tanya, why are students, why are people across the globe saying this needs to end? Well, it's because three things still exist: discrimination, prejudice, and stereotypes. And I've put the definitions up there if anyone needs that little reminder of the subtle differences between them. But we know that we can't treat people unjustly, we have to be fair. But do we always think about our own prejudice? That maybe at times we have unfair feelings that are formed without us even realising it, because of media, because of advertising, because of our own upbringing. And sometimes we stereotype people. We say, oh, all people from this group are like that. Those stereotypes can be dangerous. because those stereotypes can lead to prejudice and ultimately lead to discrimination. And it's really important that we recognise that all three of these things are dangerous. So although lots of the media attention has focused on real discrimination, there's often been fatal discrimination when it's led to deaths, we need to recognise that all levels of this is dangerous and all of it has a negative impact on people's lives. So protected characteristics, there are 9 of them. And obviously, like I say, we will be doing more on sexual orientation and the impact that has on relationships because June is Pride Month. But obviously, for the purpose of this assembly, we're focusing on ethnicity. It is a protected characteristic. It links back to the human rights. So if these rules are already in place, why do we need movements like Black Lives Matter? It's already in law, so surely we already know that we cannot treat people this way. Why do we need events like Pride Month? Why do we need to raise awareness of LGBTQ plus issues? Why do we need them? They're protected in law. Well, if you've had to ask yourself that question, you probably have your answer, because it's a privilege for you not to have to worry about these issues. These issues still affect members of our community. They are legitimate concerns for members of our community, for our global communities. They can affect daily aspects of people's lives. So we have a responsibility to listen, to learn, to empathise, and that we can enact change in our community, our school community, and try and hope that it makes an impact on our local community, our national and our global community. But unless we all take responsibility for this, it won't have the impact that it needs. So what is Black Lives Matter? Well, it began as a hashtag on social media. There was a 14-year-old boy called Trayvon Martin. The police were called after a man called George Zimmerman saw him in his neighbourhood and said he was acting suspiciously. And there was an altercation and Zimmerman fatally shot Trayvon. Now, to even get that to trial, there was a huge petition, the biggest on change.org's website at that time, just calling for the trial, and he did eventually face trial, George Zimmerman, but he claimed self-defence, and there was a law called Stand Your Ground, which meant that you could act a certain way if you felt threatened. It supported his actions and he was acquitted. That's when the Black Lives Matter hashtag really took off on social media, trying to bring about change for people like Trayvon and people that come before him and people that came after him. Since this time, unfortunately, there have been further deaths of black people, some that are really high profile and some that didn't necessarily make national news or international news, where prejudice and discrimination appear to be a factor. They might be deaths caused by police action. It could be members of the public reporting on innocent people, and Mr. Sapong in his video references the video with the lady with her dog. And that idea that we are still using our own prejudice to negatively affect others. There have been targeted attacks recently as well that have made the news just by other citizens, and we have to go backwards a little bit to understand why that's so scary, and I'll get to that shortly. But the most recent death as well that's really brought traction to this movement is the death of George Floyd, who was killed when an arresting police officer knelt on his neck for a prolonged period. Floyd was heard saying that he couldn't breathe. Bystanders were heard saying that many a times, repeating that he couldn't breathe. Unfortunately, the police officer did not get off his neck and George Floyd died as a result. And this has really brought about a sense of a call to action, and it's led to protests and kind of mass action on social media. People really are saying out loud, again, why is this still happening? Why do we still need to tell you that Black Lives Matter? In response to Black Lives Matter, some people are posting the phrase, all lives matter. All lives are important, no matter who you're from. And that doesn't mean that some people are still in support of the Black Lives Matter movement. They do still feel that black lives are important and, that there are issues facing that community. But others are questioning, should we be prioritising black lives? Well, I hope these images give good analogies of why this phrase, all lives matters, is actually considered to be missing the point. Have a look at the one with the person who's hurt her leg, saying my leg. And the person says in response, well, what about my legs? In that moment, the person standing doesn't need to worry about their legs. They have legs, but their legs are fine. In the same manner, look at the one with the houses on fire. We should care equally about everything at the same time. All houses matter, but one's on fire. We have to prioritise the one that is on fire. In other words, black people need more support at this time because of the unique issues that they are facing that others are not. And to post All Lives Matter, you might feel that you're posting it and still in support of the Black Lives Matter movement, but it perhaps misses the point of why that phrase has built such traction and why many people feel it's so important. Now, as I said earlier, we can't hope to move forward if we don't understand the journey, but there is too much to cover in one assembly. So what I've done for you, and again in a minute you can pause the video and you can scan the QR codes. What I hope you take some time to do is to look into these aspects in more detail. I'm going to go through each of them that are listed here in some detail on the next few slides, just to give you a bit of background. But obviously there's so much more to say, and the videos that I've chosen, I've tried to pick ones that are short enough that they are kind of clear and concise, but there are lots of other videos out there that you can look at. And there's a fantastic documentary on the 13th Amendment called 13th on Netflix. It's about 2 hours long, and some of it is very political in response to America, but it's so interesting. So if you do find this interesting, you want to know a little bit more about it, it might be something that you check out with your families. So I'm going to move on to those 4 things that I've kind of made reference to here. Like I say, you can get way more detail if you click on the QR codes, if you scan those and have a look at the videos that are attached. So we have to go back to slavery and colonisation. If you have studied poems like Checking Out My History by John Agard, which we study at GCSE, you might know a little bit about colonisation, but it was when settlers went to other countries and colonised them, created colonies. So Britain had many colonies across the world, and unfortunately it often led to very poor, unjust treatment of people, the native people of those countries, and unfortunately people were taken as slaves. And slavery is something that, like I say, is a huge topic in its own right, but what's particularly important and relevant for America is the fact that even when slavery was abolished, even when it was decided that slavery should no longer have a place in society, unfortunately the poor treatment of its people didn't end. So we had what was called the 13th Amendment, which in the middle of that screenshot there, I've just added a text box, and that's wording from the 13th Amendment that says that we can no longer have slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime. So what happened is that we said that slavery shouldn't exist anymore, but if you committed crimes, you could again have to partake in labour, in forced labour. Now the issue with that is that the crimes that people were arrested for were things like being an orphaned child, and they negatively impacted black people, people who had just been freed from slavery. And what happened was we found ourselves back in a cycle where a group of people were disproportionately finding themselves arrested and imprisoned and then working as unpaid labour. Now, they used to do things like lease them out to plantation owners so that they would continue working without payment, usually in poor conditions. And many people feel it was just slavery by another name. And like I say, it's a huge topic. I've just watched that 2-hour documentary on Netflix, 13th, all about it, and I still don't fully feel I understand all of it. But it's madness to think that it was almost a loophole to still continue slavery, even though we have the date of slavery being abolished. In fact, if you look at the next slide, it's still It's still in place now. In California, they save $100 million a year forcing inmates to work as firefighters. It's still free labour. And if you look at the statistics for black Americans in the prison system, you'll again see they are disproportionately represented in the prison system. And there are so many economic factors, so many factors as to why that is. And like I say, that documentary explores it in great detail. So I can't hope to put it in adequately enough into this assembly. But again, it's really interesting, but it's really worrying to consider the fact that we perhaps still have slavery, but by a different name, as this 13th Amendment. And then alongside that, we also had the Jim Crow laws, and these are kind of familiar issues to you, I would imagine. It's, you know, in every year in English we do a text where we can that looks at these issues. So for example, it's referenced in Holes. We look at it in Of Mice and Men in Year 9, which obviously used to be on the GCSE syllabus as well. But they were laws that meant that blacks and whites were separated, and the phrase was that they would be separated but they would be equal, and it gave a legal standpoint to allow segregation. And black and white people did not take the same transport, they didn't have the same facilities, they were supposed to be equal facilities, but they weren't. And it was another way of treating black people so poorly and so unfairly. And obviously the campaigns of people like Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, eventually with so many brave souls in there, too many to name but mentioned in some of the videos that I've linked, we eventually ended this kind of era of the Jim Crow laws. But it still didn't mean that everything was fine just because legally it said it was fine. And I'm going to show you this image now, which some may feel is a little thing, but once upon a time emojis on WhatsApp, on Apple, were only yellow or white, and it took some time for people like Apple and WhatsApp to bring in emojis that represented the diverse cross-section of our societies. And like I say, it might seem like a small thing, but have a look at the images on the next slide as well. The term flesh coloured in that first image on the left of flesh coloured plasters, when actually it's only flesh coloured if you are white. Flesh coloured tights, the fact that there are brands that have to be in place just to provide flesh coloured tights for black people. It used to be a term that was used on crayons as well, flesh coloured crayons, but they would be that white, light beige colour. Imagine with all these little things, imagine feeling that you are never represented fully, appropriately, positively by mainstream media, by advertising, that you actually can't even get the products you need because of the colour of your skin. And then Cosmopolitan recently posted, then deleted, a list of the 10 most beautiful women according to science, and the list was unanimously made up of white women. All of these little things suggest a much bigger problem, and as I say, you have to go backwards to see that we have had a history of segregation, of discrimination, of prejudice, of stereotypes, and to understand why these little things matter. They do matter. This video, again, which you can scan on your app, gives more in terms of American statistics, but shows just how much racism can affect just about every part of someone's life, someone's everyday life. I'm now going to link to some British statistics, because as I've said here, we know the issue isn't just in the past. The issue actually isn't just in America. Why are people here protesting? Well, it's because we know that there are plenty of statistics from Britain which show this is not the case. Now, these are not fully analysed. So in sociology, you'd look at this, but so take this stop and search statistic. Look at how often black people are how much more likely they are to be stopped by the police, to be stopped and searched, than white people. Now, as I say, in sociology, you would analyse this. You would look at so many factors as to why this is the case. But it's not just that. And the reason I've used these statistics is because these are some of the only available statistics from a study that is backed by lots and lots of government figures. So this is just one example. There are plenty of other statistics out there, but obviously I wanted to ensure that whatever you got was factual. But this report, Black Caribbean people in Britain 3.8 times more likely to be arrested compared to white people, and then the fear of crime. That 28% of Black Caribbean people in Britain said they thought they were more likely to be a victim of crime, compared with 18% of white British people. So it's not just the fact that they're more likely to be stopped themselves, but their fear of crime. Why? These are questions that need to be asked. Look at the statistics for our prison system, that more than half of the inmates held in prisons for young people are from a black and minority ethnic background. The highest proportion on record, 51% of boys aged 15 to 17, young adult men aged 18 to 21, identified as being from a BME background. 42% of children up to the age of 18 in secure training centres from a BME background. Proportion of BME boys behind bars in young offenders institution, nearly 4 times the actual population of BME people in the UK. These are statistics. They show that there is that, again, disproportionate is the word I've used a couple of times. There's a disproportionate number of black people in some really difficult situations, being in prison, being stopped, being searched. What we have to do is look at why, but that is not something that we can cover in full. Miss Graham and Miss Brown, who teach sociology, they will tell you that this is something they have to cover in so much depth. There's so much behind it. But what it does do is show you that there are issues. There are issues that need addressing. Confidence in police, that it's lower for black people than it is for white people. Gender also plays a factor there. We know that in sociology we have to analyse data, but we see that the confidence they have in police is lower for black people. That educational attainment is lower for black people. That they have the highest rate of detention under the Mental Health Act, suggesting that there are issues with mental health that affect black people more than they do for white people. The highest unemployment rates of all ethnic groups. Among 16 to 24-year-olds, 11% of white people are unemployed, with 18% of people from all other ethnic groups, the largest gap of any age group. This affects you as a young person. This is why it matters. Now, the changes that are really necessary must come from the very highest levels of our government. Those figures need to change. Not so that white people are suddenly disproportionately included in those, but to make it equal. Because remember, Black Lives Matter is not about the fact that Black lives matter more, but they need to matter at least the same. We all now must play our part to ensure that we end discrimination and prejudice. So what do? We listen, we ask what people need, and we recognise that we're each shaped by our own background, our own experience. We learn. It's too much to cover here in one single assembly. If you really want to be anti-racist, you need to put some effort in to read, to research, to watch. I'm doing that. We all need to do that though, so that we can all fully empathise, to fully understand the full extent of the issues before we can truly grasp the feelings that black people have. If we want to say that we all stand together, we need to make sure we really understand the stance that's there. So this is not a tick box exercise. We've always tried to cover diversity in our curriculum, always. But Student Voice have said they want more work in this area. And we're responding to the news, to the current feelings. And thank you to everyone that got in touch specifically about this assembly following my email. We'd already tried to improve what we did for Black History Month. And of course, June is Pride Month. That was another bit of Student Voice. They wanted to do more. So there is going to be a separate assembly on this because as we were designing this assembly, we realised just how much needed to go into this. We want each topic to be covered in detail, and to do it justice, we will do our very best to do that. We have already had a dedicated PSHE day to being respectful, whole sessions on protected characteristics, but we'd always plan to build on that more. Obviously with lockdown, we haven't been able to do that in the same way, so just know this is part of our curriculum, it's part of ongoing work, it does not end here. But you need to tell us what you need from this assembly, what's missing, what still needs to be said. Obviously I've put links to those videos, I can put out Thought for the Weeks with video links in that we encourage everybody to watch again. I'm happy to do that in a range of formats to try and make sure that everybody gets their voice heard and that we respond to what it is you need. Please send all of those comments to me directly, to Mrs. Goodwin, so that I can look at the curriculum for Thought for the Week, for assemblies, for PSHE, and we will do our very best to make sure that we say what you feel we need to say here at King John. If you do have specific worries about your own well-being, mental health, then you can contact your year team leaders, or you can contact one of the safeguarding leads, and they will have further advice and resources. But as I say, if it's specific to these kind of topics, please send them to me, Mrs. Goodwin. I hope that this assembly has given you some food for thought. I know it's a long one, but from all the feedback I received from students, I think you wanted to make sure this was covered in detail. I know it hasn't covered everything. I hope it hasn't intentionally glossed over anything, but please tell me if you think something's missing, and we'll make sure it's included next time. Thank you so much for your time, for sending me stuff in advance, and for listening now. Thank you for supporting your peers and your community with this Black Lives Matter movement. And please make sure this isn't just today or just whilst it's popular on social media, but we need to make sure that we do all take responsibility for equality in our own school, our own community, our own lives. And I look forward to working with you all over the coming months to make sure that we're doing all we can to help you on that journey. Take care, everyone.